So, welcome everybody to this discussion today, where we are going to be discussing, or this discussion is going to be around Soumya Awasthi's book. It's got a very complicated title. It's a very simple book, but it's got a very complicated title: Diverse Narratives and Shared Beliefs. All sounds very academic, including the first two chapters, which are very very academic and therefore boring. And the real fun starts from the third chapter, when she starts taking up the Deoband movement and builds it up around the larger narratives in the region, um, and does the study in what's happening, not just in the realm of terrorism, but how the movement has grown in India, in Pakistan, Bangladesh. And that is really the fascinating account. She's put in a lot of hard work, written a fabulous book, which throws up a lot of ideas, many of which probably have a lot of contemporary value, and help you understand what might be happening today, what has happened maybe 100 years back or 150 years back. And before I asked Soumya to weigh in, what struck me was that when the Deoband movement starts, in the backdrop of how the Deoband movement really started taking off, or what were the compulsions for the movement, what struck me was something which we see around us right now. That the Muslim community at that point of time did not feel that its religious practices were threatened, but what it felt was political empowerment. And that is what was the fillip to a lot of the stuff which happened around that time. And we hear something similar nowadays. So there are a lot of lessons. If anybody was to read the book and imbibe the right lessons, I think there are a lot of lessons for contemporary India in this book. So Soumya, many congratulations for an excellent work, and you seem to have worked very hard on this volume, and kudos to you for that. Uh, what we'll do is we'll ask Soumya to talk about the book for about 10 minutes. By that time, hopefully, Ambassador Bisaria will be out here. And then we have a fantastic panel: Ambassador Bisaria, who served as the High Commissioner in Pakistan. We have Shalini Chawla, who is an acknowledged scholar on Pakistan and on these issues. And of course, my friend Ashok Behuria from IDSA, who is probably one of the best scholars we have on Pakistan, on Islamic movements, on terrorism. He's done stellar work in that particular field. So you have a fabulous panel today. But Soumya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to each and everyone who is present here, to my friends and colleagues from different organizations who are here to cheer for me. And yes, so my book looks very much like a Bollywood movie script, where initial period is very boring, but climax starts after the interval. So third chapter is the interval of my book.
It's rewritten.
Yes. So I have a small presentation just to take you all through what comprises in this book, the chapters, and I'll try to be within 10 minutes. Otherwise, I will just shut it off. So why this book? Actually, when 9/11 happened, that's my personal anecdote why I took up this topic, is that post 9/11, I read some newspaper clippings here and there where it was mentioned that Deoband sponsored Al-Qaeda, or Deoband, radicalized, and Deoband ideology. So there was a lot of mention of Deoband, and in the same breath about Al-Qaeda and 9/11. So that led to my curiosity that is it really Al-Qaeda, Deobandi, and where it is coming from. So that's how I started this research, and I realized that there is a lot of gap in the research work or in the contents that was available, because most of it was Western perception of Deoband Islam, which was and there was a lack of some script which was advocating for indigenous understanding on the subject. It's because there is so much of complexity and significance within the South Asia's geopolitical landscape which needed some attention. So that is one of the reasons why I picked up this topic and the book came up. It also examines that how Deoband affect on regional and international geopolitics. The conceptual framework describes there is a content which you can see, but the conceptual framework of this book is the aim is to establish a comprehensive categorization of the Deoband school, which is the USP of this book, and emphasizes on comparative perspectives across India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And it is trying to simplify the narratives about Islam according to this categorization. Now, before I jump onto something, this is for audience who may not be very clear on what is Ahle Hadith, Barelvi, and Deoband. So it's displayed here how each one is different. I'm not going to go through it. I'll just leave it for here. So then the context of the book, it examines the re-emergence of religion as a force in the interstate and intrastate politics towards the end of the Cold War. I am trying to critique the relationship between religion and security. Religious discourses in international politics, where is one of the aspects, the core. There are variables in the book. So one of the variable talks about the religious discourses in the international politics, where I talk about how from the Westphalian Treaty onwards, we talk about separation of religion and politics, but eventually it fails, the Westphalian Treaty fails, and comes the secularization theory. Again, the secularization theory doesn't do justice to what its objective was, and then we see religion playing some role in the Cold War, and then the re-emergence of religion in the geopolitics and politics. I'm trying to discuss here the changing Quranic interpretation, starting from the formative period, which was the period of the Prophet Muhammad, then the Middle Age, which is also called as the so there is Sahaba, which is formative period, where you see these companions of Prophet Muhammad called Sahaba, and then there is Middle Age, which has Tabains. Tabains are those who are the second generation from the Prophet era, and then there is modern period, which has some elements of Tabe Tabain, which is basically third generation. So second and third generation is covered in the Middle Age and Modern Age, and that's where we start seeing the real change in the Quranic interpretation. When you talk about the modern period, we had scholars like Sayyid Qutb, Muhammad Faraz, Abdul Azam, Osama bin Laden, and Ibn Taymiyyah. Uh, Now, coming to what is classical Deoband in India. So the journey of Deoband begins during the pre, and then of course carries on to the post-independent India. It reflects on the role of Shah Waliullah and his son Abdul Aziz, who actually gave the first ever fatwa on mobilization of the community to stand against the British control and calling them kafirs. So that was the first recorded. Of course, there is one more fatwa, but Fatwa-e-Alamgir, which also talks about jihad. But in the Indian context, Abdul Aziz fatwa becomes the first one to talk about jihad. Then I have discussed in this book about the role of Deoband in revolt of 1857, the Reshmi Rumal Tehreek, which is also called as the Silk Letter Conspiracy, the movement, sorry, and then there is Faraizi movement, which started in West Bengal and is there in the present day Bangladesh, where we saw its genesis, and then the Khilafat movement. I also look in the book in detail the institutionalization of Darul Uloom Deoband, which starts in Saharanpur in 1866, and there is a backdrop to how it all happens, which is discussed. But one thing I wanted to highlight here for people who have limited understanding on Deoband is that Deoband is considered as the second most prominent institution after Al-Azhar in the Cairo or Egypt, and so it is considered to be equivalent to that. Again, this is just a brief understanding on what Deoband comprises of, and what its focuses on is the daily practices, the rituals, religious practices, and then we see a gradual shift in the socio-political issues on the prevalent circumstances that we have in present time. According to my own study, I had to really work on how can I classify this whole Deoband dialogue and discourse on Deoband. So I identified 4 different categories in which I have been able to define the Deoband followers. One would be conservatives who are practicing Muslims but are limited within their own community and not stepping out, maintaining a social distance. Then there is a fundamentalist, a little bit of a stronger flavor to conservatism, and then there is extremist and then radical. So this is how I define. It's open for anybody's discussion and challenges, but this is for my sake that I wanted to know where I am looking at when I talk about the three countries. And then Darul Uloom Deoband has been refuting this claim that it's a Dar al Harb, which is basically meaning land of war, and it also rejects the apocalyptic hadith, which is Ghazwa Hind. So this is one thing that has come out time and again in the fatwas released from Deoband in India, and they are very much focused on Islamic traditions, and they attempt to adjust within the bigger, the landscape or the diverse society that India has. So they are trying to maintain balance with their religious practices as well as their understanding of the nation state. But there was also a lot of mention of Turkey that I found during Deoband visit back in 2019. When I was there for my fieldwork, I came across many scholars and ulemas and people who have passed out from the Deoband seminary talking about Turkey and the movement and reminiscing the old past of Ottoman Empire and the Caliphate movement. Their political issues remain as any Indian would have, and on especially on women, I found them to be a little more reserved and are not very welcoming to the changes that they were seeing, especially when I discussed with them about triple talaq and issues of women working in the spaces where there are Muslim men and non-Muslim men also. Then I define the Pakistani Deoband as Neo-Deoband, and there is a reason for calling them Neo-Deoband because it's a deviation from the original Deoband, the classical Deoband which we have in India. And it's because the creation of Pakistan itself was based on the religious identity. So for them, remaining within the same understanding or the tenets of classical Deoband, it was a bit of a challenge. So that's why I see a lot of role that the ulema started playing in the politics and the geopolitics of Pakistan, even if we start with the creation of Pakistan itself, the Pakistan project or the Medina project. So we see that Muslim League started using them as, for justifying their movement, creation of Pakistan. They banged a lot on the ulemas. And it was then that many Deobandi ulemas refused to support the Pakistan project. And some of them, of course, supported it, starting with Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi and Shabir Ahmad Usmani. They were the two prominent Maulanas who supported the creation of Pakistan and backed the movement. So this movement brought a stark division amongst the Deobandi ulemas. And again, I use certain terms here which are not referred anywhere else. So this is more of my contribution to writings on Deoband, that how the Deobandi ulemas are accommodative and they were more pro-India, whereas the one who supported the Pakistan project were rejectionist in the nature because they felt that living in a homogeneous society is not good for the Islamic teachings, and we cannot coexist with each other. Hence, we need a state which is defined on the religious identity. Again, I'll just quickly come to Pakistan and transnational Islamism. We see a lot of influence of religion in these 4 or 5 categories. When you talk about Islam in security aspects, it is, of course, intertwined with national defense. And I don't need to elaborate on it anymore because we know how the present day chief or has also been referring a lot to Quranic verses and talks about protection, defense and everything from the religious perspective. Or if we go back to the 1970s when we saw General Zia-ul-Haq doing Islamization of Pakistan, we see that there has been a lot of intertwining between the national defense and the security and religion. Then, of course, you see religious activism, historical Islamic revivalism continued post-independence. Pakistan-centric activism, we see that, again, religious identity forged into national unity. Actors of transnational Islam in Pakistan, diverse Islamist groups exist there with global, regional, and local goals. So if I have to name, probably global would be Jaish-e-Mohammed, regional will be Lashkar-e-Taiba, and then there are local goals also that they have and they exist, whether it is TTP, who is fighting the war with the present day government of Pakistan. And then, of course, there are a lot of political actors and ideologues who are overemphasizing on the religious identity and talk from the lens of Islam. Hence, Pakistan becomes both a base and a bridge for transnational Islamism. Religious ideology is intertwined with security, policy, political structure, and national identity, which, of course, fosters a complex network of Islamist movement operating locally, regionally, and globally. Now, coming quickly to the last aspect or the feature of the book is hybrid Deoband. Why I call it a hybrid Deoband is because uh, the book gives it all, that how this whole journey of Deoband from India to Afghanistan happens. And once you read the book, you will have more understanding. But quickly telling you more that, there before partition happened, there were a lot of people traveling from Afghanistan to Deoband in India, where they got their education, went back, started their own madrasas, and identified themselves with the Sunni Hanafi school of thought. And they were very limited other kinds of sects, but more predominant was the Sunni Hanafi school of thought. Within the Hanafi school of jurisprudence, the Deobandis are there, and hence you see the relevance of Deoband in Afghanistan. Now, there have been a bit of overlap between the Deoband of Afghanistan with Deoband of Pakistan. And then you take it back to the Cold War period, where you saw the war between USSR and the United States, the war for relevance, the war for power, where then the petro money comes in. They are used by the Pakistan General Zia ul Haq, and he starts a lot of madrasa education, where you find content like this present in the madrasa curriculum, which is printed in Nebraska University, and it's all again in the open domain. It's it's a secondary source now. So you see these kinds of publications starts coming in. So when you say that there are Deobandis, and of course Taliban themselves claim to be Deobandi, so they have mixed Deoband with Pashtunwali and what I call in my book is Wahhabi influence. So there is a concoction of three different kinds of understanding, interpretation of Islam that merges together and becomes a hybrid version of Deoband. And hence calling them only Deoband would be something that I would certainly challenge. But yes, there is heavy influence of Deoband when you talk about certain norms, whether it is related to earlier when it was related to their governance system and their opinion on women. Now, of course, things started changing when the involvement of Saudi came in. Then you see the interpretation changes completely. Now, these two structures explain you how how the narrative or the discourse of Taliban is structured. And you will find a lot of emphasis on the cultural and political aspect, and of course, religion. But for them, the Pashtunwali, which is the previous map, this structure which I showed you, it talks about pride. It talks about justice. So Pashtunwali is nothing but a tribal code of conduct which has been helping them even before Islam enters into Afghanistan. So this is what is there. So it's a three concoction. Now, what is shared belief? Coming to the title of the book, what is the shared belief amongst the three countries? So it's common scriptural interpretation across Deoband communities. Initially, it starts with that. Unified jurisprudence within Deoband tradition. We talk about Hanafi jurisprudence, which is present there. For people who, again, don't understand jurisprudence, there are four schools of jurisprudence: Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi, and Maliki. So Hanbali is something which is heavily influencing Wahhabi interpretation of Islam. Hanafi is mostly present in the subcontinent or South Asia. And that's what you see here, that the three countries, again, have a unified jurisprudence, which is Hanafi. Their educational traditions shapes the Deobandi identity. Yes, the madrasa system emphasizes on methodologies, which is similar. The curriculum is also influenced by Darse-Nizamiya, which starts in UP, the United Province, and travels all the way to Bihar, to Delhi, comes to Delhi, and then moves further. And then collective religious identity beyond national divisions. What is diverse narrative in this book is that local geopolitics and social context significantly shapes the divergent narratives of the Deoband Islam, reflecting distinct historical experiences and community interactions across India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Again, state instrumentalization, religious leader agency, nuanced analysis, all this political power dynamics is also influencing the Deobandi understanding. So, what is it? Now, again, this is something I really cherish about my work, is that I managed to categorize and classify Deoband according to the three countries we are talking, the case study I took. So, in case of India, I call it classical Deoband, which is fundamentalist but accommodative. As you see, they are, Deoband is easily living in harmony with the other non-Muslim communities. Pakistan, I call Neo-Deoband. It was rejectionist, extremist, and radical in nature. Afghanistan is hybrid Deoband, again, extremist and radical and rejectionist. But I missed writing one point, that they are also refuting to call themselves as hybrid Deoband. They want to be called as Deobandis, and that's something we need to discuss and negotiate. The key learnings of the book will be to reinforce the significance of religion in international relations, and with unleashing of modernism, socio-religious institutions struggles to find their space in new environment. Classical Deoband in India is moderate, in tandem with local secular democratic progress. However, when I look closely and I go back to my field work again, I realize that there has been a lot of undercurrent in what they think about the present day India and their views on certain issues. Then I feel that maybe institutionally they do not talk about dissent, but within their own classroom communication, talking to each other on in casual or in canteens or wherever, there is dissent which is brewing in Deoband. That's what my understanding is. Of course, foreign policy decision makers have been employing religion to influence geopolitics. We have seen this a number of times when we look at geopolitics around South Asia and beyond. And of course, lastly, Neo-Deoband of Pakistan and hybrid Deoband of Afghanistan assumed violent tendencies due to their rejectionist and fundamentalist turns. Thank you.
Thanks, Soumya, for this overview of the book. But I think the book needs to be read because there are a lot of nuggets and a lot of information, and I guess a lot of lessons in the book. But let me open the discussion by first turning to Ashok. If I remember correctly, there was a time when the Deobandis were treated as heretics within Islam. The normal mainstream Muslim used to treat the Deobandis as not necessarily conforming to true Islam, but now they seem to have become mainstream. But what is striking to my mind is the fact that every time there are modern challenges, the response is not a modern response. The response is to go back to the basics, which in a sense is antediluvian. Am I right or am I wrong? But the floor is yours.
Let me begin with congratulating Soumya for the book, and also Ware for, I should thank Ware for having me here. Let me come to the central theme of the book, which Soumya has also tried to acquaint you with during her presentation. It is basically religion and IR. That's the way she conceives it. But after second chapter, as Susan said, it comes into comes to, Deobandism, what does it mean in India and Pakistan, and then it comes to how it can be divided into three different categories. In fact, you should not look at these categorizations as, you know, very ossified, very solidified ones. You have overlaps always. Like you have hybridity in hybrid Islam or hybrid Deobandism in India as well, as much as you have new Madinaism is also here. But having said that, let me tell you that how this entire thought process is working out in this uh, subcontinent, because this is something which is germane to the subcontinent, but it has not remained locked in the subcontinent. Deobandism has proliferated. It has gone out. You will find it in South Africa, in Europe, in US, in entire Central Asia. So it has not stayed confined to India. But its origin is very interesting, which is, I would urge you to go through the book. You will find out what perhaps, Soumya, for lack of time, or because of the focus was on her book, she didn't reflect on. It's basically because of the ideological struggle going on inside Islam, which is very fascinating. In fact, I keep on saying that if Islam will survive in this subcontinent, it is not because of its inherent Islamic principles, but because of the wonderful diversity within Islam. That is in the book. We had discussed it there. One of the British bureaucrats had sent out a report to the British government saying that this may be categorized as the first war of independence in India. So and they held Muslims central to it. They said Muslims played a central role in this, resistance. And that is why over the next 2 years, you found, lot of things taking place in the subcontinent, which led the Muslim elite of this subcontinent to look for something like Deoband. In fact, some missionary literature that I found very interestingly points to the kind of atrocities that were inflicted on the Muslims of the time. They were butchered, copies of Quran were burnt, and thousands of them were hanged. And the Deobandi stream, interestingly, they conform to a very interesting strand of thought within the fold of Islam, the Asari Maturidi school of thought, which is there in the book. You can find out. Basically, if you look at the one and look at the subcontinental Islam, there is a constant tussle for influence between the Turkomans and the Arabs. And this Asari Maturidi tradition is basically patronized by the Turkomans, because we got the Turks first. Then the Mughals came, and the Central Asians also came. And this Turkish Hanafi Asari Maturidi influence was something which defined the subcontinental Islam of the time. But when it came to Islam interacting with the religion or religions of India, you found a different strand emerging from within this Hanafi Maturidi Asari tradition. So if you look at Deoband, when this tradition came about, they borrowed a lot of things from the Shah Waliullah school of thought. Shah Waliullah of Delhi in 1700, he was born in 1702 and died young, rather young, in 1760 he died. Shah Waliullah was the one who actually defined the nature of Islam in this subcontinent, where you had the Asari Maturidi tradition also mixed with, very interestingly, with the Sufi tradition, Naqshbandiyya Chishtiya tradition here. So the composite culture that emerged out of this hodgepodge, out of this mix, was what we know today as Deobandism. So Deobandism in its pristine pure form as it emerged in 1866 at that point of time was like this. And Sushant is very right that when this tradition came up, it was still regarded as very conservative by most of the Muslims in the subcontinent, who wanted it to be diluted further, because Barelvi is still a dilution of that. Barelvis are also Hanafis, but they represent a diluted form of Deobandism, and they were the ones who stood up against the partition of India. Interestingly, whereas the Barelvis, they supported partition. So this was the background. But when Pakistan was established, as she points out in the book, there were rejectionists within the fold of Deoband itself. So who started saying that, it's not un-Islamic to accept partition in the name of religion. But there were rejectionists who started accepting it. They migrated to Pakistan. And there are 3-4 books, not more than that, I counted, which pointed out the role of Deobandi Islam in reshaping political tradition within Pakistan. So even if they are in a minority, they have shaped the discourse in Pakistan. But interestingly, when it comes to Afghanistan, and what is there in the book, and also, I think it is slightly missed out in the discourse, which I think it was a gap, that when Afghans came to Deoband and started studying there and brought this took this religion back to Afghanistan, they blended it with local traditions. But the hybridity that she talks about, which we will get to here in the book, is slightly different. I have not talked about the Arabism yet. The influence of Arabism on Deoband is something that has changed the context and the contour of Deobandism altogether. I would say that, if you read this book, you will find a lot of information in this regard, and it will enrich your thinking about Deoband. But we'll come back in the discussions. Thank you.
Look, Shalini, if I can turn to you before I go to Ambassador Bisaria. We've heard about how Deoband has, in a sense, become mainstreamed. Khalid Ahmad used to call it the high church as against the low church. He used to call, at least in the Pakistani context, he used to say Barelvi Islam is the low church and Deobandi Islam is the high church. I'm sure you've come across that. But we saw that Deobandism in Pakistan also actually grew after the Afghan war, 79, with all the funding coming in. Although for those first 10 years, from 79 to 89, it was the Jamaat-e-Islami which was taking the lead insofar as the jihad was concerned. But the Deobandi foot soldiers were going, most of the guys. And we've seen this phenomena grow post that with the growth of the jihad industry, as I call it, Deobandism did spread much faster than what it did before that. Is there a connection then between the jihadist ideology and Deobandism? What is your opinion on how do you look at this very steep growth which has taken place, both in terms of influence, in terms of the madrasas we speak about? The madrasas till about 78, 79 were maybe a couple of hundred. And then they just spread and 20,000 odd. And that is the ones which are registered or known. There are a whole lot of others which are smaller schools which are unregistered. I'm sure even in India it's something similar. But Shalini.
Thank you, Sushant, for posing a very, very interesting dynamics here. I would like to thank Warif and Soumya for inviting me here. And I must begin by congratulating Soumya for an extremely detailed and a very well-researched scholarly book, And I think after Barbara Metcalfe seminal work that we have seen. I think this is the only book in my mind which covers Deoband in the context of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So admirable scholarly contribution by you, Soumya, and I've really enjoyed and gained from the book. So congratulations again. I think every chapter is a delight. It gives a very sequential description of the journey of the Deoband movement. I just have some points on the book, and that should also I will cover what Sushant has posed here. And I think the work, Soumya's research is tracing the origin of Deoband, its evolution, how it shaped and it continues to now manifest in the region, and specifically in the case of Pakistan, which Sushant has talked about. I think the book highlights some very, very fascinating facts. One of them, which I was planning to say, but Ashok talked about it, that how the originally the idea of the separate Muslim homeland was evolved and how Deoband leadership reacted to it. So actually the Deoband leadership was aware of the dangers of the Muslim League's ideology, and it stood for the undivided interest of the Muslim community. But then there were oppositions within Deoband, but by and large, what we saw that they were not in favor of the partition here. Then Soumya has talked about the four broad categories of Deoband: conservative, fundamentalist, extremist, radicals. And then she has also, I think, very beautifully discussed that how it has managed to rise above this classification, especially in case of India, and propagate, kind of coexistence between the religious communities that we've seen. But then evolution, obviously, there have been changes that we see here. India, we have talked about, Soumya has talked in detail. But in case of Pakistan, I think, which also brings in Sushant's, question here, that I think the evolution of Deoband has been shaped by a combination of factors, very interesting factors, and I'm going to mention four factors here. One was obviously the flawed two-nation theory, which became the basis of creation of Pakistan. And that, I think, invariably strengthened the underlying current of intolerance within the society, state, Sunni-dominant society for minorities and other religion. Secondly, Pakistan's insecurity from the time of its creation, given its small size, its constant complaint about the unfair distribution of assets, the perceived threat from India, which it continued to project. All these insecurities were dealt by the state with a very, very heavy reliance of religion as a tool. So I think religion was used continuously for the rationale and survival of the state. And that is one of the factors that we see how the evolution of Deoband has been extremely different in Pakistan as compared to what we saw in India. And this use of religion became the basis for the foreign policy strategy, adopted terrorism as a tool. And then we saw the entire militant, a very violent dimension of Deoband that we see in Pakistan. The third factor is the very complex power dynamics within the country, where military plays a very dominant role. And now I think the stage Pakistan has reached, even dominant is an understatement, where we have seen with the series of constitutional amendment, 27th Amendment, it's a totally different dynamics. And I think this power dynamics has not only promoted alienation suppressions, but also the state policies have been creating to the military lobby, which has not allowed the other concept of a welfare state to kind of come into being. And the fourth and the very important part has been the geopolitical developments which attracted the external actors. And starting from the first, I would trace it to still again 50s and 60s, when Pakistan actually joined the military alliance with United States, and we could see the base being built up there. But the Afghan war obviously changed the entire dynamics because of now the money was coming in, the legitimization was there, the sanction of the West was there, the role that the ulemas started to play in the society, that we saw kind of shaped up with the Afghan war. And that's where we see the Deoband dimension totally changing there. And in Pakistan, what I feel that we see three dimensions of Deoband. One is obviously the religious dimension, which is very natural. The second is the political dimension, the political face of the movement, which is the JUI, which split into two factions, JUIF and JUIS. And then what we saw, that JUIF is a player on the mainstream political Pakistani politics, particularly in KP and Balochistan, and they have participated in the electoral politics. They have also had alliances with the secular parties. So we see a very different dimension in the politicized version of Deoband in Pakistan, which is quite unusual. And so this also, in a way, I think highlighted a very pragmatic dimension of Deoband, where it was trying to implement itself through the democratic institutions. The second dimension in Pakistan is the militant dimension, which is the most crucial for us, and which obviously intensified after the Afghan war, which Sushant was talking about. And we have been dealing with terrorism for decades now. Jamaat-e-Islami played a prominent role during the Afghan Jihad and supported Gulbuddin Haqmatiyar, which transformed the entire conflict dimensions in Kashmir. And then obviously Jaish-e-Mohammed remains most potent Deobandi militant organization. So I think that's why very rightly Soumya calls this Neo-Deoband. And I was pretty fascinated by Soumya with your three categories that you created. So I think in Pakistan, the journey of Deoband has been very different because of the fact that it came into alliance with the external actors, not only United States, but in the 1980s, we also had a very strong impact from Saudi Arabia. So, its merger with the Wahhabi ideology, that has also played a role, which also she talks about it. So Deoband went through entire, transition phase here. But what I want to really talk about here is that, the chapter on Pakistan actually brings out some very interesting, irreversible trends in Pakistan, which came into being with the alterations and divisions in the Deobandi that we saw. So I think many times when we discuss Pakistan and we talk about this question that can Pakistan change, I think that chapter, if you read it deeply and seriously with the background knowledge of Pakistan, it really answers that why it's going to be a real challenge to change and why generational change is required for Pakistan to change. A very critical development which finds exhaustive explanation in Soumya's work is, and where she's gone into really great detail, is the transition in the education system in Pakistan. And I think that, to my mind, is the most critical, where she has highlighted that how social science curriculum was talking not about the state policies, but multiple other things. It's on page number 108. All of you should definitely read it. And that actually explains that why change in Pakistan is going to be a major challenge. And as I said, it needs a generational change. And the fourth point is the mushrooming of the madrasas, which Sushant talked about. And I'll just end by quoting her, where she said on page 135, she says that the role of the madrasas, which started as a response to the Western encroachment in the Muslim socio-religious sphere in the 18th century, has transformed over time in the Indian subcontinent. Not only they persist with anti-Western attitudes in educational and social sphere, but they also supplemented their curriculum with a narrow sectarian agenda aimed at nurturing supremacist tendencies in their students. So I think this is something which she's talked about, our irreversible trend, which gives us a very deep understanding of Pakistan. And I'll just end with the question that, yes, Pakistan has relied extensively on religion for its survival, for trying to, have that security, but it's still not secure. So that reliance on religion, reliance on the external actors has still not brought any form of security to Pakistan. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions, and then, of course, you're free to say whatever else you want to say. One, there has long been a debate in India that from around probably the 90s, maybe later, maybe earlier, you being in government might have a better idea. Uh, a lot of the people who wanted a religious education would make a beeline to India, would come to Deoband and get educated, and then we stopped giving visas. And one of the grouses has been when you speak to some people from Deoband, they say that we were never preaching jihad, we were never preaching violence. And then the very people who would come to India for education, for religious education, would go to Pakistan, places like Akora, Khatak, and others, Jammu, that Benori Town Mosque and those kind of places, and would get radicalized and would spread radical is thought around the world. Uh, did we shoot ourselves in the foot? Did we respond in a knee-jerk manner without understanding, the nuances and the intricacies of this entire thing? That is one. Second, in Pakistan, if you look at the Deobandi movement out there and the political side of it, uh, you know, uh, the Pakistani state used Deoband movement, but also split it, because the original Deoband party was never exactly an establishment party. Now, Fazlur Rahman sometimes is establishment, sometimes is not establishment, but he remains moderate. I'm sure you've interacted with him. That would be your impression. I personally consider him to be one of the wiliest political minds I've ever met. Somebody there's always a lot to learn from, even if you don't agree with him. But he has a very fine mind. Um, but they split that party between JUS, Samiul Haq, who was into this whole radical thing. And then the party was further split into Sipai Sahaba. Sipai Sahaba also was not enough for the radicals. They went into Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, and now I don't know what all they've gone into. So but the votes were always uh, in the Deoband movement with Fazlur Rahman and the moderate part. In Balochistan, they formed the JUI Nazriyati. They never got any votes. It was JUIF, which would always win the vote. What is this phenomenon?
Thanks, Sushant. And before I come to your question, of course, congratulations, Soumya. I think it's a feat to have a book like this, which is a deep dive into something which we talk about both in terms of policy and in terms of scholarship, but a real serious scholarship deep dive. And also, congratulations on making your PhD thesis publishable. That, I think, for scholars is also a model that can your book be published after your scholarship is done, and will it be of some relevance to not just scholars but to a wider audience? So congratulations on both those things. On this panel, a lot of heavy lifting has been done by the two scholars. So my job is simpler. What I'll try to do is bring a policy and practitioners' perspective to this scholarship and try to see, just make a few comments on it. But before that, Sushant's questions. This question has always engaged us on visas and giving the visas to the right people. With particularly with Pakistan and Afghanistan, there happens to be a security veto on most of such decisions. And what tends to happen in a very practical sense is you tend to use a sledgehammer rather than a scalpel, because there's a very legitimate concern. The security guys will tell you, show me a way in which I give visas to the right guys and keep the terrorists out, right? Or the radicalizing elements or the bad guys out. And there are no very good ways of explaining that. We've seen this recently in the Afghanistan context also. But I think in the principle is valid. We have to use the scalpel. We have to make sure it's very focused. And people, the principle also is that when scholars come in, students come into India, vis-a-vis the opportunity of going, say, to Pakistan or elsewhere, they get a more well-rounded view of India and of the particular religious education they get. So I think I would make that general point. Again, on the second issue, I'll again make a more general case that Pakistan's army has always instrumentalized the various religious movements, including the Maulana and JUI and so on, at different points, not just from the 70s and 80s when they did it more seriously, but all through they have used these as either to destabilize some of the political parties or to strengthen them. But let me come back to that issue also. for me, when I read this book last week, I think it really was an education. I think it brought about a lot of very interesting issues on the table. Uh, Three things jump out to me, which I'll just quickly mention. I think they, in a way, define the value of this book and from a policy perspective. So let me start from the specific point that all of us have spoken about, which I think is the chief contribution of this book, is the classification of the regional trajectories of the three Deobands, how they had distinct paths based on the geographical, the political context of going either to India, to Pakistan, or to Afghanistan. And we've talked about the classical Deoband. You've talked about it being as accommodative in India, and in a sense, this branch invested in India's more secular politics and lived in harmony. What made this become a Neo-Deoband in Pakistan, what you call rejectionist and heavily influenced by Saudi Wahhabism? Was it because of the Islamization that happened from the 80s, or was it because of a more structural factor that the Pakistan army instrumentalizes everything, the deep state instrumentalizes everything, and therefore they wanted to use it in a particular way. And of course, the third issue you mentioned, the hybrid or fundamentalist Deoband Islam, which is influenced by the Pashtunwali code and tribal code and the Wahhabi influences, and it gets prominence during the anti-Soviet Jihad, and where madrasas along the border become training grounds for the Taliban. And I think this is sort of a contribution of this book, that it could become a narrative. I wonder whether the Neo-Deoband and hybrid labels will be accepted as branding by those two others. So that will be the test of your newer branding, whether they accept the branding or whether they reject it. And I think we had a very live illustration of this when, in October, the Afghan foreign minister came here, Muttaqi, Taliban's foreign minister. He got a rock star reception at Deoband. So the question, I think, debate that we had was, will Muttaqi come and infect this is Islam, this Deobandi version with the Afghan version, or be influenced by it and see the softer version and take that lesson back?
I bet on the second one.
Okay, so you bet on him being the nice guy and taking the softer Islam back. So I would tend to agree with you that coming and exposing him to that process was good. Although there was a lot of critical comment on that why was he allowed to go there? Why was he allowed to become a rock star to what could potentially be radical elements? So I think that is the real world implication of what happens. The other two things that jump out to me are also the broader influences, the inferences which would interest any student of geopolitics. Does the Deoband model that you explore, does it you talk about religion and international relations being intertwined? I would modify that as being religion and power being intertwined as drivers of how nations behave. And I think it's particularly valid for South Asia. Now, you've used the lens of the various theories of IR, realism, neoliberalism, constructivism. And what struck me is that you've said in realism, state and non-state actors would use religion for power and security. In neoliberalism, they'll fill the gaps by ineffective state institutions. And in a constructivist lens, it's about identity. In Pakistan, all three of these are deployed. So, it becomes a mishmash, and you don't know which theory is applying there, because it is each one of these elements is being used. The second point that jumps out to me in the broader context is what you call the failure of the secularization theory. That, the nation state was made 300 years ago, the Treaty of Westphalia. And why is it that, we were meant to have nation states to have the distinction between politics and religion, between church and state. But this fails because we have a world which is highly religious, and particularly in the India-Pakistan context, we have neo-colonial countries of 80 years of vintage. And do they become more religious because they, particularly Pakistan is deploying that religion along with power and other structural factors in driving its own nationhood, but also its relations with India. The other thing, and this speaks to a couple of policy relevant hypotheses that you have. You mentioned one, that Pakistan has institutionalized the Deobandi religious network to exert influence in Afghanistan and counter the influence from India. And this again speaks to what Sushant was asking, that whether the Pakistan is deploying all these influences in a different way, and I certainly think it does. When I was going to Pakistan in one of my trips, at that point, the Barelvis came into the news cycle because Tehreek-e-Labbaik was blocking Islamabad. So one Indian minister, a Muslim minister, he asked me, he said, "I'm shocked. The Barelvis are doing this. How can the Barelvis be radicalized? They are the softest Sufi Islam. They were talking of blasphemy. They were blocking roads. And they were instrumentalized by the state, despite whatever convictions they had, to talk even a little more, to keep the politicians unstable, to keep the system of guided democracy that the Pakistan army was running to work in a certain fashion." So I think that it was an example. Again, from a policymaker's point of view, we tend to feel that there are multiple Pakistans, and we have to have multiple policies for dealing with these multiple Pakistans. And when we try to deal with these different strands of Islam, and we came to the conclusion that many of them, at least in terms of the organizations, had been deployed, used by the state for different purposes. So, this for in a policy relevant way, we need to study them, but also see how they've been instrumentalized for different purposes by the state, and particularly with respect to India. The other point you mentioned is about transnational movements like the Tablighi Jamaat and Muslim Brotherhood, who use religious discourse to communicate ideas across borders. So you don't really need visas for those ideas to be coming, and they create a global web of connections that bypass traditional state boundaries. So I think this is again an interesting thing to study because the ideas are traveling across borders, and why is it that even then you have very different kind of schools evolving, even when the ideas in this age can cross the borders easily. More generally, I think when we study Pakistan, I think this book contributes, and therefore, in multiple ways, we need to understand different strands within the political ecosystem, how that political deep state interacts with the different religious organizations and uses them, and how it has influenced them. Because I think that is important for us to study when we study Pakistan. In a policy sense, it's a very important thing for us to do. Just like you understand the US by studying MAGA, and its drivers and what they are really looking for, I think it is important to understand the driving influences and the combination of the religious forces and the army have been an important force in Pakistan. Let me stop right there.
I think we have about maybe half an hour because I'll take 15 minutes more. But I'll give you 15 minutes more. I'm going to open the floor to questions, but I will use my position as moderator to ask the first couple of questions. So one, Ashok, to you. Do you think that the way the Deoband school operates today, it is in a sense antediluvian? And I use the word antediluvian in the sense that the idiom in which they speak is not connecting to a large number of Muslim youth. That's the impression I have got, but I wanted your opinion on it. And they haven't quite figured out a way how to change the idiom in which they address the congregation. They seem to be very comfortable in that old 150, 200-year old way that they have been doing business. They haven't really changed. If you ask them, why haven't you changed? They say, we have changed, we brought in computers. Computers is not change, right? It is that instead of using that old column, now you use a pen. That is not change. What you write with the pen is change. I haven't seen that. So do you think, one, that factor? Ambassador Bisaria, I don't know if the foreign minister Mutaki can go back or I should probably put it to Soumya, that if Mutaki goes back, I'm not sure if he will be able to project the soft face. Perhaps if the Amirul Mominin was to come out here and go back, maybe that would be a lot more effective than the foreign minister. So I just wanted your view on that. Third, to Ambassador Bisaria, uh, the Deobandi, the Pakistanis deputed a whole lot of top Deobandi clerics to go to Afghanistan and indulge in a religious discourse with the TTP, no, with the TTP and these other guys, and the TTP guys and some of the Afghan Taliban people came up with even better arguments and shut them down. So all these big Maulanas of Pakistan were caught running with their tail between their legs and had to come back to Pakistan because they were shocked because their own students used their own logic to defeat what they were trying to sell, the Pakistani army line, which they were trying to sell to the Taliban. So I wonder what you make of this. And finally, Shalini, you taking off from what Ambassador Bisaria said about a minister who expressed surprise that the Barelvis are doing what they are doing. We seem to be full of this kind of lazy analysis at the highest levels of government in India. These stereotypes that we have, that the Barelvis are something, they are just the guys who take a guitar and sing Sufi music. It's kind of weird, the kind of stereotypes that we have about different people. And obviously, it means that people in government at very high levels have zero understanding of what radicalism is and what the well springs of radicalism are. Because they just have to see some of the things that some of the Barelvi groups in India have done to understand that what has happened in Pakistan is not an outlier. It is quite normal. So Ashok, starting with you, and all of you can do it, and then I'll just throw it open to the floor.
No, I think you have said that whether it is still antediluvian. On the face of it, it would appear so, but I would say, looking at the way they are also trying to respond to the changing ecosystem, I would say that they are in the process of a churn. What will come out of it is still not certain, because 10 years of rigorous radicalization, state-sponsored radicalization in the subcontinent has also come to invade us, has come to influence their thinking as well. As I was saying, somebody took my cell phone and deleted all the photographs and returned to me. So I would say that, now that in the Pak-Af region, that kind of radicalization is no more kosher. At least, it is not sponsored by uh, powers like US anymore. And you have de-radicalization efforts also kicking in. I would say that, things may come down a little. But what I would say, very interestingly, quite, I have seen on the contrary, because the question that you were asking, Ambassador Bisari, I would try to also take liberty to also answer in some way. Very interestingly, the TTP that you were saying, that they defeated the Maulanas, Deobandi Maulanas from Pakistan, is very interesting. Their logic, if you look at it, they were not employing any jargon from the Arabic Hanbali tradition. They were very well rooted in that Hanafi tradition when they were negating the Deobandi argument. This is very interesting. If you look at a small video that was issued by TTP, it was called Azadi ki Fareeb, the deception of Azadi. So there they are saying that the entire formation of Pakistan was galat. They're borrowing from the Deobandi logic. And they are saying, ये जो दरार आया, ये जो पार्टीशन हुआ, ये सिर्फ हमें हमारी हम मजहबियों से दूर नहीं किया, ये हमें हमारी हम वतनों से भी जुदा किया. It's a very interesting argument. So they are coming back to that Qawm argument of the Hanafi sect, that Qawm doesn't consist of Muslims alone. This is very interesting. At the same time, he is saying that the Shias are wajibul qatl. They are saying the Pakistan army is wajibul qatl, because Pakistan army fields many Christians, many Hindus, many Sikhs also in its midst, howsoever small they're there. So this kind of an army cannot be legitimate in an Islamic dispensation if you are calling Pakistan an Islamic one. So this is very interesting. So point I'm making is that the kind of spurious mix that is there, ideological mix that is there in Pakistan today, it is very hard to fathom. You will take time. And how it will pan out will depend on how Afghanistan is stepping up. To a large extent, because we must remember that a lot of this radicalization that we see around us is a result of the 10 years of acute ideological radicalization that was attempted by America and co, and nothing else. Even then, if you look at its influence on India, I would say that whether it is because of Deoband or because of the democratic tradition and democratic system that we have, system of governance you have, you did not have any Indian going to Afghanistan to wage a jihad. Whereas Muslims came from all other corners. Philippines से आए, Indonesia से आए, Afghanistan, सारे Africa से आए, Latin America से आए, America से आए, Europe से आए. Not a single soul from India.
Okay, I'll turn to Soumya to answer my question.
So I definitely wish
Yeah,
that
quickly, because I
Emil
want to
comes
give
in.
people the.
Yeah, I wish he comes and then we can show him what true Deoband is and can give him a good influence. But that's like something, a very utopian thought that it seems to be right now. But yes, if they claim to be Deobandi, then we have all the way to explain to them the right version of Deoband through these people, and then help them, make the lives better for people and especially for women there in Afghanistan. So that will be how I vision it to be.
Ambassador.
Okay. So I think we should give the benefit of the doubt to the foreign minister that he got the spiritual vibes of Deoband and he transmitted them to his leader, and that they'll have a newer understanding of the difference and therefore want to change. But on your second question, the policy of sending clerics, the policy has evolved, and the policy has evolved in the sense that it used to be a policy that we will send clerics and influence, the Afghan Taliban. But that has now obviously been abandoned. Now the policy is clearly, the policy goals were recognize the Durand line, ban the TTP, and get the Indians out of there. So none of those goals were achieved. So now the policy is of send the missiles in, blow them up, and yesterday they're saying that the PTI is the political arm of the TTP. So the state keeps experimenting with new policies to discredit them and deploy deploy different means of trying to discredit.
Shalini? If you don't have anything to say, because I was just
Yeah,
being
because
snide out there.
like you are, thinking about losing your job, I might also end up doing that. But yes, just very quickly, just 1 minute, I'll take here that, this aspect of Barelvis and violence, we have seen it 4-5 years back, Sushant, when it happened, the Udaipur Taylor was murdered, and then we had the violence in Bareilly, and then it was attributed to the regional developments, Islamic State franchise. So yes, it is linked to what's happening outside. It is also linked to our lack of understanding, and that's a very deep question, because then it also reflects on our counter radicalization, strategies, what kind of implementation we are going to have. So this is understanding which needs to be developed, and I think Soumya's work will maybe add up to this understanding.
Thanks everybody for being out here.